Welcome, everybody, to our 180 webinar brought to you by Exponential. And as a pastor at a local church, um, I've heard, particularly post-COVID, kind of a corporate confession from almost all pastors, kind of a deep lament that, you know what, we have not done a good job discipling our people. And so with that in mind, the 2024 big idea for Exponential is 180, a return to disciple making. And that's the conversation we're going to have in this March, the first week of March in Orlando, as we kind of kick off what is our theme for the whole year around disciple making. And to give you a little bit of a big, kind of the big idea, we're really focusing on, before we get to our discussion today, 5 shifts. And the first shift is a shift from reaching to making,
hmm
shift from simply growing the size of our ministry or our church to making more disciples. The second shift is from informing to equipping. Instead of just giving information, to holistically equip every follower of Jesus. Then we're going to talk about shift 3 is attending to attaching, which is calling people to truly uh, attach to God and others and not just to program and events. And then shift 4 is from striving to thriving. And that's moving from unhealthy striving to thriving in a spirit empowered disciples and emotionally healthy leaders. And it culminates with shift 5 from accumulating to deploying, where we move from just accumulating and warehousing people in big boxes on Sundays to really deploying people for the mission. And we're going to touch on several of those shifts today, but we really want to kind of double click on the importance of defining a disciple. And I am really excited to have with me a friend of mine who's also going to be a main stage speaker at Exponential in Orlando in March. So we're delighted he said yes to that. We're really going to focus on kind of defining disciples. So with us, we have Léonce Crump. Léonce gets the opportunity to speak not only nationally, but other places around the world, a former NFL athlete, senior pastor, founding pastor at Renovation Church in Atlanta. Also an author, wrote the book Renovate and the more newly released The Resilience Factor, a step-by-step guide to catalyze an unbreakable team. Léonce is married to Brianna, and you have 3 daughters and a son, I believe. But
That's
most of
right.
them, hey, thanks for being here. And wherever you're joining us from, you can kind of welcome Léonce. It's good to have him here. And I'll tell you, before we start our conversation, though, if you haven't been with us in the past, just go ahead and drop any comments or questions into the Q&A. And if you drop those into the Q&A, Leon and I got a few things we want to talk about around disciple making and defining disciple making and the practice of disciple making. But even more than that, we would love, love, love to help you figure out how to do it in your context and your situation and address kind of the questions and challenges that you're uniquely facing. So anytime as we're talking, drop those in there and we'll try to, address those and deal with some of those. All right. So, hey, Lance, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here. Out of breath when I arrived, but we made it.
That's right. Now, where were you coming from?
I was coming from Orlando for a denominational meeting and crazy flight out there. Scariest flight I've ever been on, honestly. But that's not today's topic. And then just late coming back. So it's been one of those trips. But here I am. We're good to go.
Yeah, and thanks for your hustle and thanks for your willingness to be a part of this and really engage this topic. If you don't mind, I thought it might be good because I don't think I know this either,
Mm.
but it'd be good for our people to hear kind of your own story. And who were the folks maybe early on that intentionally invested in you? Were there people, maybe I shouldn't assume that, were there people that discipled you um, along your journey? And who were those and how did that impact you?
Yeah, so in kindness to my parents, I will say they did what they could with what they knew. They were not church people. My dad became a Christian when I was 16 years old.
Oh, wow.
My mother became a Christian just a few years before that after attempting suicide. And so they didn't really have a framework for any of this. And then I became a Christian at 16. And I would say that I was a convert. And I know we don't parse this theologically, but track with me. I would say that I was a convert, but I wasn't a disciple. No one had discipled me. And the church that I was in at the time really was kind of built on that um, kind of college ministry model where you get like the most popular kids you can to draw as many people as he or she can, and they just wanted to fill up the box on, for youth group. And so that's all I knew. I got to Oklahoma University, and I struggled bad. I really put Jesus on the shelf, and I was partying, I was drinking, I was doing all the things. And I ended up meeting a man named Mike Wilson, who is the one that first really discipled me. And I've told this story so many times, that at 18, 19 years old, I was trying to drink myself to death and party myself to death, and just seeking pleasure at every point. And one night I almost did, and the next morning I was so shaken by it, that I stayed in bed all day. And I remembered it was a Thursday. I remembered that there was a college ministry that happened on Thursday evening on Campus Corner. Campus Corner is where all the bars were when I was at OU. And I had wandered into this church because one night we were playing a drinking game and going bar hopping. And we left one bar and I heard live music coming out of this building. I was like, well, let's check this place out. And realized very quickly it was a church service, and turned around and walked out, and then went to the bar next door. So Mike was one of those people with a true vision for making disciples, for raising up men and women. And when I walked in that night, I was standing at the back, tears in my eyes, really rattled. And he came right up to me, Dave, and he grabbed me by my collar. And our size differential is probably about me to you, right? So he grabbed me by my collar and he goes, "When are you going to stop running from God?" And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." I got up in arms at first, and he said, "No, you're running from God. You've got a call on your life. When are you going to stop running from God?" And then I started weeping, and he just held me like a big old baby. And then he discipled me from that day forward, and actually was the one that called me into vocational ministry.
Wow. Okay, so from that kind of catalytic event, when you say he discipled you, I'm curious, like what kind of interactions were there? Certain rhythms to your relationship? Were there certain things that he
Mhm.
did with you?
Yeah, so I would say the thing that he did with me intuitively that I didn't even understand then, and I would love to get your perspective on this actually. I feel like mentorship is kind of information exchange. I will meet with you to give you something.
Yep.
But discipleship can include mentorship, but it's really, I will bring you with me where I am, and show you the way that I live in the midst of where we are. And that's what he did. He took me to meetings. He took me to conferences. He took me to events where he was speaking. He took me to ministry opportunities with him, at the nursing homes. Wherever he was going, sometimes 2 or 3 days a week, he would take me with him. And I learned more about Jesus and about following Jesus. He invited me into his home. His wife, Jenny, would cook a meal for us once a week. And she called me her biggest baby because she had 3 children. She's like, "These are my babies, and this is my biggest baby." And they really like enveloped me into their family rhythm that extended well beyond a church service or a small group. And those things are good and right and necessary. But I think discipleship begins where those things end, and where people are invited into the rhythms of your life. And if it's, a healthy person practicing the way of Jesus, then you're going to be swept up into what it looks like to healthily practice the way of Jesus. And so I saw him be generous. I saw him pray for homeless people. I saw him give to the poor. I saw him ferociously proclaim the gospel. Saw him gently share the gospel with hurting people. Like I watched him do all of these things over the course of a couple of years, and wherever he was, I was there, unless I was competing or doing something else.
Wow, that's what a huge gift to have someone like that in your life. It's interesting. I love the that distinction you make between mentorship, which is kind of almost the sharing of information, versus
Hmm.
discipleship, which is really like, no, come and do life with me, which leads to transformation.
That's right.
So here's my well, I mean, I my comment on that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's exactly what Jesus did. I mean, there
Yeah.
was information being passed, but mostly it's like, no, come and hang out with me for 3 years. That was what really took place, which That is so cool. Okay, here's my question though then. So building on that, having that experience, okay, and you said he was the one who called you into the ministry. I'm curious, are there any of those practices or principles or things that you learned from Mike from back in the day that you either intuitively, you just did it because he did it to you, or you intentionally, you know what I'm saying? Did it
Yeah.
and continue to
So
do.
yeah, so I would say in the beginning of my ministry, I did it intuitively. You know, our house was open, especially when we moved to Atlanta to plant our church. We would have people in and out of our house, you know, sometimes 4 or 5 days a week, which I don't necessarily think is healthy.
Some
There's got to be
boundaries.
some balance. There's got to be some rhythm. That's when I discovered that I'm actually an introvert. I'm not an extrovert. I just know how to behave in extroverted environments. And but we would have people in our home all the time, and we were deeply ingrained in their lives. And then I think what happened is, you know, we started our church in home, and then we opened a public gathering, and all of a sudden we went from 50 people to 150 people to 600 people to 800 people to 1,200 people over the course of about 6 or 7 years. And so the intuition had to transition into intentionality and really trying to scale that model in an overly busy Western context. And so I did start having to be more intentional at that point in doing some of the things that Mike did with me and showed.
Well, I'll tell you what, and put a pin in that one because I want to come back to some of those things that you had to then intentionally kind of put into the culture of renovation. We got a question here from Randy too, and I think it picks up on a comment that you made. You said I was a convert but not a disciple, and I don't think he's pushing back on kind of the theology around this. I think he's really kind of saying, and here's the question: where in church history do you think we strayed from making disciples to making converts? And I might add, not only where, but why do you think that happened? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts on that.
Let's hear them.
I think one of the primary flashpoints we can point to is the early stages of the church growth movement. In fact, I was just rereading Will Mancini's book, Church Unique, which is such a fabulous book
Yeah.
on, you know, missional impetus and redemptive passion and kind of finding your kingdom concept. And one of the things he talks about in there is kind of the birth of the church growth movement. And so I think we really transitioned to this transactionary gospel, you know, which is in the Bible. We do exchange our sin for Christ's righteousness, but leveraging that as kind of a ticket to heaven, very individualistic. Um, I think that really started with the church growth movement. Like pray this prayer, and you're good. The box is checked, and it was much easier as your church is exploding to count the number of people who prayed a prayer and check the box than to actually watch the fruit of somebody's life develop over time. And so I think it was a combination of the church growth movement and kind of the religious right movement marrying into, you know, politics and other democratic practices that are not found in the history and the rhythm of the church. I think that's where it started.
So what I'm hearing you say too, so as we bought into this sociological idea about growing churches, and here's how you do it, and all of a sudden, what we value, probably as leaders and pastors, that we value having a growing church, having butts in the seats,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
changed how we did things. So instead of the focus on disciple making, it focused on growing church attendance, which all the things you just named, and that was a big part of the shift.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Tell you what, let's do this because I promised up front we would talk about this, and I do want to hear, and maybe Mike even influenced some of this from the early days at Renovation. Do you have like a clear definition of a disciple that you
Yes.
use over and over again? Okay, awesome. I didn't know your what your
Yes.
what is it?
So I have a sentence, and
Yeah,
then I have kind of a deeper definition.
let's hear
Um, and, and the sentence is going to feel very generic,
that. Okay.
but a disciple is someone who loves Jesus and others as Jesus does, even their enemies. And that is a definition that one of my good friends, Matt Adair, and I were volleying back and forth on text one day and drilling down into this before we ever planned to have this conversation. Because I was sharing with him that our team is really working through a new vision frame for our church and trying to make sure that we're still clear on the bullseye. And so we started working through that definition, and then we broke that out. And here are some things that I would say in a disciple at Renovation, I want to see formed in a person. And these are directly contextual to where we are in the culture that we're in, right? So a disciple has the heart of a servant, an unhurried life, a soul of blessing, rhythms of spiritual discipline, life giving relationships, and are committed to reaching one more for the sake of the gospel. So for us, that's a more expanded definition, and it's directly related to where we are. In Atlanta, everybody's in a hurry. So a disciple would live counter to that. We're going to slow down. In Atlanta, everybody is out to get their own. So a disciple would say, actually, I'm going to outserve anyone that I can. In Atlanta, we are all about entertainment. So a disciple is about spiritual grounding and practices of solitude and silence and rest and fasting and prayer. In Atlanta, relationships are very transactional. And so a disciple of Jesus is someone who's looking for life-giving, transformational relationships, not transactional.
So you have a simple, sticky definition. Then you have kind of a more expanded, like
Mm-hmm.
paradigm. Why? Okay, and because we got a lot of church leaders, a lot of pastors listening in here, so I think this is going to be helpful. Why do you have both of those things?
Because the sticky definition allows me to to get a kind of a galvanizing vision around what we're trying to accomplish. And then the longer paragraph actually informs. And so this is the intentionality and the systemization. It informs our preaching calendar. It informs our small group semester. It informs our mentor communities. It informs our young adult ministry. It informs what we don't do and what we will do. It informs kind of the arc of how we accomplish our mission and how we measure success. So if I was to say, when will I know that we're successful? When over the next several years, I see people who would not serve cultivate the heart of a servant. I see people who were always too busy for community suddenly slow down their life to be in life giving relationships. I see people who were not generous, who were stingy with their time, with their kindness, with their wealth, suddenly become a soul of blessing. That's Proverbs chapter 3.
Mm.
I see people who shied away from sharing the good news of the gospel suddenly not only being deployed in their communities and sharing the gospel where they live and work and recreate, but also inviting those communities to be a part of their spiritual family. And that's success for us. And we may not, you know, we may not grow to 3 or 4 thousand people. If we have to accomplish that, I want to. I don't want to grow to 3 or 4 thousand people without accomplishing that.
Right. I I think that's so good. I was listening to a conversation just this week on really on metrics and stuff in the church, and I like it was actually a podcast. I just wanted to reach into that podcast and tell them you're talking about all the wrong stuff. You're talking about all
Mm,
the wrong stuff. And what I hear you is, I mean, no, I hear you talking about the right stuff. Here's the best we can do at Renovation Church to kind of define what it means to be a disciple. Here's a paragraph to give it some robust information around on our context, and we're going to do everything we can to inform our teaching and everything that we do to make disciples. If we grow, great, and we probably will, and we probably should. But the bullseye is on disciple making.
that's right.
Somebody, I don't know if this is possible or not, but someone was asking, do you have that list written down somewhere where we can share it with the attendees?
I do. I don't think it will be helpful
Go ahead and explain why then.
because the list that I form comes out of months of prayer and conversations with our lay leaders and cultural exegesis to understand what a disciple looks like in Atlanta, Georgia. And so, I mean, I'm glad to share it. I just don't know that it would be helpful because I wouldn't tell, did you know I used to pastor in Sevierville, Tennessee? Did you know that?
No, I did not know that.
Do you know where that is?
I have no idea where that is.
So that's a little podunk town outside of Knoxville.
Okay.
It is the home to Dolly Parton's theme park, Dollywood,
Okay.
and it's where Dolly lives herself.
Hmm.
I would not have ever defined a disciple in that context as someone with an unhurried life because they already have an unhurried life. They are living slow. They are barely working. There's not a lot of ambition. Lots of Mountain Dew babies. So to understand a disciple in that context is very different than to understand one in the center of a popping metroplex that is competing to be a global city. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Well, I'll tell you what then. I'll tell you then, and we're getting some great questions. So again, people, if you got stuff you'd like to have Léonce address that we're talking about related to disciple making, drop them in the Q&A and we'll try to get to those. Well, let's do this then, because I think this will be more helpful to people listening in, our church leaders and pastors. Um, if they're wanting to do the same thing that you're doing, create a simple definition and then contextualize it. Give us, if you can, give us 3 or 4 principles. Here's some things. Do this, don't do this. What would you say to that? Like, how do they actually create their own?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is go to the word and discover the definition we all share for disciple. I mean, you could parse it in any way that you want to, but it's love God and love people, right? And that's it. And then you begin to piece together the other kind of foundational statements Jesus made. Like I came as one who serves, not as one to be served, right? That's an incredible statement. Love your enemies. My goodness, what a statement that is. And so I think you start pulling these kind of countercultural narratives out of the gospels that rattle this Western framework, and you start there and say, okay, how do we craft this in a way where our people will get it and where they will latch on to it? So that's the sticky statement. And then because I like doing things collaboratively, and I know you're the same way, when I got ready to answer the question, and here's the question you're answering, guys, or ladies. Who are we forming? That's the first question. Who are we forming? And when are we successful?
Hmm.
Because everything you're doing is forming someone. If you wonder why your church people are consumeristic, it's because you formed them that way. I know that from experience. I got caught up in it. We talked about this in a whole other venue where, Dave, I told you, I set out to plant our church in an Ephesians 2 and Ephesians 4 paradigm.
Yeah.
And then we started growing and I started paying people to do everything. What does that communicate? That communicates that you're here, church participant, to watch the professionals do the ministry.
Yep.
Because we had 21 staff members, you know, and post COVID, through COVID and post COVID, man, the Lord just really grabbed my heart and reminded me, of my first love and why I got into this in the first place. And it was to equip the saints for ministry, right? And so we took about 6 months, and I grabbed 7 or 8 people who are not on staff, who are, great leaders in our community, and we started asking these questions together, and that's where all of this came from.
That's terrific. So I hope you guys are picking this up because I mean, the 2 questions, get a gospel-oriented biblical definition of it that's sticky, and then to figure out in your context, ask the 2 questions: who are we forming, and when are we successful? Hey, we got a question from Trey here, and this is good. He said, if you were hired on as the first pastor of discipleship in a local church that had not previously had a discipleship process, what would be the first couple of steps you'd begin to take?
The first step I would take is to ask my senior pastor how he or she defines a disciple.
Okay, so that what we just covered, that'd be
What we
step
just covered. That
through
like
your
when
through your
you
lead pastor.
yeah, when you know, hey pastor, when you think about what is a disciple here at local community church, tell me what you have in mind. And that's where I would start, and then I would broaden that with the lead pastor's blessing. I would broaden that to the senior team or to the elders or to the staff, however it's structured, and I would broaden that, and I would begin to do the work of cultural exegesis right there in our own house, and then I would move from there to taking a considerable look at the culture of the place where we were, the host culture, where we're planted.
Mm-hmm.
It's taken me several years to get a bead on Atlanta. We had three launch teams before the one that opened us publicly because everybody's so transient
Yeah.
that we would have people for 2 or 3 months and then they move away. And so one of the very first lessons we learned is that our gospel presentation is always going to be competing with the transience of Atlantans, right? Atlantans love to be entertained. Atlantans will be late to everything and leave early. It was shocking to me. You go to a Seattle Sounders game, they're there from the start. They're not moving till it's over. Here for Atlanta United, the stadium is going to be half empty until most of the way through the first half of the game. And then it's going to clear out before the last quarter of the game. And that's with the Hawks and the Falcons and everybody. So
It's like
that's the
Los
culture we're in.
Angeles.
It's a lot like that. And so I think
You don't
doing
get
the
you
work.
don't get that in Chicago.
No, you guys are real fans. You guys are
We
real
have
fans.
bad teams, but we're real fans.
There are no real fans here, man. There aren't. All right, that's not fair. There are very few real fans here.
Okay.
The Braves go down a couple points and people leave. And you can see it on TV. Like you can see the exodus. And then they end up winning the game. So that's our culture. And so I think the next step after doing kind of an internal assessment of where people actually are on what a disciple is, then it's the external exegesis of the nature of your host culture. And then it's setting up several conversations over several months. This is what I would do personally. Set up several conversations over several months with key leaders, with key staff members, and start to cultivate the sticky statement and the lengthier paragraph that is born out of that prayer and those conversations and that exegesis.
That's super helpful. I hope everybody's picking that up because I mean, what you're talking about is really a collaborative process that really and biblical process to come to this definition, the sticky statement, and a broader statement, but then also rolling it out a little bit at a time, so you're able to create a brand new culture that really values disciple making the way you've defined it in that context.
Yeah, and then you drip it. Every Sunday, I find a way to weave in one of these ideas. You know, if we're big vision end, right? We all end where we're going to accomplish this. Our vision right now is to see 300 people baptized and 2,000 first time guests,
Awesome.
and $8 million in giving over the next 2 years, so that we can continue to expand the work of the gospel here in the city. So I end my sermon saying, if we're ever going to do this, we have to be people of prayer. We have to commit to life-giving relationships. We have to put ourselves in a position to care that God leaves the 99 and goes after the one more all of heaven celebrates. And so whoever your communicators are, after you get down to the sticky statement and then the broader understanding of it, then you start to weave that into every teaching moment. You start to weave it into the conversation. You start to weave it into your marketing collateral. You start to weave it into your website. And that's what begins to form a culture around it. And then you have to live into it. I'm tired on Sundays, but I have a couple of young men that I'm discipling. And so even after preaching, a couple times on a Sunday, They come over, they have dinner, they crash on the couch, they ask questions. We have deep life conversations. Sometimes it's structured around a book that we're reading together, because Gen Z, I'm very concerned about their resilience, and so sometimes it's structured around something like that. Sometimes it's just a free for all to know where their hearts are, and to point them to where I failed, and where I've depended on the Spirit and on grace, and watching them blossom. I had one young man that was really drifting, and he wasn't showing up on Sundays, and he wasn't serving anymore, but he was still coming to my house on a weekly basis. And now he's come full circle.
Hmm.
That's what discipleship has to look like.
All right, Lance. I mean, I guess I can't help. I feel like I'm color commentating on your play-by-play here. But I really, what I want is I want the leaders to hear what just took place there. I mean, you gave a great definition, gave some great, cultural context for that definition stuff. But maybe the most important thing you said that I hope everybody takes away is you're going, oh, I have two guys that I'm discipling.
Well, more than two, but these are
Okay.
just two in particular.
Here's two, at least two guys that I'm
Yeah.
intentionally having life on life, inviting over to my house, that I'm investing in, that I'm making disciples. Um, so I guess I can't. If you want to create a culture in your church of disciple making, I don't know. See if you agree with this or not. I would say even more important than getting a sticky statement, even more important than all the stuff that and Léonce is blessed with a brilliant mind. All those things that he gave to us, leaders. If you will do it yourself,
Yes.
you will do it yourself. I'm telling you, that's what because primarily we're culture creators. And I think that's what you just said there, kind of snuck in there, is so powerful. So anyway, I want to say thanks for doing that and being such a good example of that.
Well, that's it's what was given to me. I'm not a good man. I'm a spirit-filled man that learned from someone else, and it's just creating consistent culture. If I tell people, yes, I want people to worship with us on Sunday. Absolutely, I do. Because, Richard Foster writes about the Paul Yahweh, the voice of God that can only be heard in the gathering of God's people. I'm all about it. But if I tell people our church is not just about Sunday, but then I distance from a kid who stopped serving on Sunday, what am I communicating? And that is something we have done.
Yeah.
All of us as leaders have done that because we don't see the ROI anymore in building up what we're trying to build. But when you realize, no, we're trying to form people who look more like Jesus, and in Atlanta, form them in this particular way, then even when they stop showing up on the weekend, that's when you open your house even more, because that allows them to see that this was never about my butt in a seat. It was about my life being transformed in the company of these people, and it's been pretty transformative for us.
That's cool. All right, we got a little bit more time here. I want to because we got a bunch of questions coming in. So Jonathan's asking
Sure.
this. It's to a specific demographic, saying, "Have you seen any useful tools in discipling next generation in the context of their culture? Anything come to mind?
Yeah.
Or any tips or thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Particularly,
Proximity.
and you talked a little bit about resiliency there, so I don't know.
Proximity. I mean, honestly, that's your greatest tool. They don't need your information. Here's the thing that I had to accept. They can find any communicator they want. They can read any book. Every bit of information they could possibly have is at their fingertips on the internet, and they're better at it than you. They're native to it.
Yeah,
But what many of them don't have are solid spiritual male figures, solid spiritual female figures, people who will speak life to them and say hard things to them and love them. That is what we're noticing. So, the our I hesitate to use the word rule here, so I'll say culture. Our culture is on our staff team in particular, and then through all of our lay leaders. I always ask the question, "Who's your five?"
oh
I
nice.
expect you to be investing in five different people at any given time. And out of my five, only one of them is over 25.
Okay,
They're all young Gen Z, fresh into the workforce. One young man, he fell apart after his first week of work. And I'm like, yes, this is adulthood. You don't have control of all of your time anymore. And you wouldn't see that as a particularly spiritual thing, but it is. It's teaching them how to be good stewards and good
Yeah.
managers of their rhythms and their energy and their time. So I think the greatest tool I could tell you to use is to get five and commit 2 years to them at minimum, and invite them into the rhythms of your life.
Okay, so proximity, he said, is probably the
Hmm.
best tool, even as we speak about next generation. Eva then asked this question. Eva says, "So okay," and it's fits the follow up here. How do you disciple someone who's not in close proximity to you, and their life situation makes it difficult for them to spend time with you? Is that even possible? Can you do that? Can you do discipleship long distance?
I think you can, but I think it has limitations.
Okay.
I think technology can help with that. Um, but I think presence is such an important thing. And even as Paul wrote letters from everywhere to everywhere, he still made a point to visit those places and to spend significant time there because proximity is such an important part of our formation. Um, Most of what we communicate is nonverbal. You know that.
Mhm.
It's nonverbal. People catch more than you teach, and so if all we're doing is interacting through digital mediums, I just don't see the long term sustainability. And so whenever our kids move away, we try to get them connected to local churches. And for a while, they'll tune into our service online and they'll want to stay connected. But eventually, if we've discipled them properly, eventually they will see that church has to be more than just watching a sermon online. You have to engraft yourself into a spiritual family. And I know there's all types of extenuating circumstances that we have to come up with creative solutions to navigate. But ideally, um, these were people that can be with you and can go with you. I take them with me to conferences.
That's awesome.
I take them with me to some meetings and appointments that aren't sensitive. I show up to their workplace and have lunch with them and meet their kind of work community. You can't do all that stuff through digital means.
All right, limitations. Let me ask you this. Anna, who's actually joining us from Edinburgh, Scotland, she said, "I found people here seem adverse to labels. Like sometimes, in trying to put some structure in your church, you might call someone a leader or a disciple or a shepherd or whatever." She said, "Any advice on removing the fear of labels? That was totally different than my church experience in the United States."
Yeah, I've never faced that. So, in fact, in the U.S., we compete for labels and titles.
It's true.
um, so I'm not familiar with that, but I think the old adage that a title doesn't make a leader certainly translates, and maybe avoid the label and just entrust them with the authority, and let them come to their own kind of revelation about what's happening. If they don't want to be called a disciple, that's fine. We're a spiritual family, or we're a community together, or we hang out, and we talk about Jesus. Um, Not having a certain label doesn't change the practice. That's what I would say. Now, again, I've never faced that. That's never been anything I've had to navigate, but that would be my instinct. My instinct would be, well, I won't call them leaders. I'll just grab a couple people that seem to lean in when we need things done, and I'll invest in them and develop them and deploy them, and I kind of do that already. One day they wake up and they realize they're
Right.
leading,
You
and
know
it's
what else?
always fun.
What else occurred to me, and I was thinking about this, Leonce, but I mean, maybe in Anna's context too, in Scotland there, if they're adverse to labels, I mean, Jesus was one of the labels he was known as was just friend of sinner.
That's right.
So what if you just, I mean, most people aren't going to be adverse to that. It's just like, hey, just be friends with these people the way Jesus was friends with people.
Yep. And I want to be friends with you the way Jesus was friends with his friends.
Yeah, I mean, you might try that, Anna. Um, okay, a couple of Kyle's got it's kind of a real practical question. So, how do you balance discipling people and get the rest of what you need to get need get? Or I think he's saying that you get the rest of the things you need to get done throughout the week. What do you have to sacrifice for the sake of discipleship? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Man, that's the sticking point that you're going to continue to face, Frank.
Yeah.
But here's what I would tell you: if you take an Ephesians 4 approach to ministry, if you see yourself as an equiper and not the lone discipler, then eventually you're sharing the load with several people, and the expectation is, I'm going to spend a couple years with these five folks, and then it's not that I'm going to sever our relationship, but I'm going to tell them, I want to make room to spend time with five more, and I would love for you guys to go out and find five yourselves. And now six suddenly has become 31, just that quickly, right? And so it's not easy. It's not formulaic. As I shared just a few minutes ago, I'm at our building pretty early every Sunday. I preach a couple times. I teach our growth track classes, and then I still have people in my home that evening. And because it's not performative, and um, because I'm not trying to present some version of a superhuman, I let them know how tired I am. Hey man, tonight I don't have much mental bandwidth for a deep conversation. Let's laugh together and you guys catch me up all night. And it's still having the same effect. They're getting the aroma of Christ in the context of community. And so I think it's just making that decision. If you wanted to put it in a formula, very early in my ministry, what worked for me pretty well
Okay.
was I would spend 1/3 of my time discipling people, 1/3 of my time trying to disciple people who are far from God, because we believe that discipleship begins before the cross, through the cross, after the cross, and then 1/3 of my time doing everything else.
I think we got time. Got time for another one? All right. I because we're getting close to being done here, but we're getting a lot of great questions. So Dan asked this, and I think since you've given us a lot of kind of here's some things to do. So he's kind of going at it the other way, which I think is going to be helpful. We're experts at complicating the simple, he said. How do we make discipleship too complicated? So it's kind of like basically tell me what not to do, because maybe I'm doing some of
Yeah.
those
Yeah, don't build a discipleship program.
things.
And I'm not anti-curriculum. I think curriculum has its place. I think it can be very helpful. But I think the way we complicate discipleship starts with not really understanding what a disciple is. If discipleship is simply, again, going back to our sticky statement, um, forming people who love Jesus and others, even their enemies, if that's what discipleship is, well, then it becomes very, very simple and very, very clear. And we don't have to have a bunch of mechanisms and a bunch of levers to pull and long, complicated doctrinal classes. And listen, these are all things that I've done. I'm not throwing shade on anybody who still does it. I've just found it way more effective to have a conversation in my living room about gender and sexuality with
Mhm.
someone who's asking those questions, uh, even of themselves, than I have found to teach it in a class of 30 people.
Oh yeah.
Because one of those is information transfer, and the other one is relational transformation. I didn't reject you. I didn't push you away. I didn't dehumanize you. I didn't minimize your experience. Doesn't mean I'm not going to tell you the truth, but you're going to hear it sitting across from me on my couch, not me standing over you in the classroom. And I've just seen that be far more effective in the lives of people. It's slower, it's messier. Um, it will not feel like it's growing at first because multiplication never does. Addition always feels better through the first 10. It
Mhm.
does. But once you, I mean, even 5, but once you cross 5 or 10x, multiplication takes over, and that's when we really have the wind in our.
Let me, I'm going to ask you one more before we wrap up here, because
Yeah,
you've obviously made it very clear your commitment to disciple making. Remind us again, because what's the correlation between disciple making and even church planting and seeing the movement of Jesus actually happen?
it's the heart of it. It's the heart of it. If we're not making disciples, the Jesus revolution doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. If we're not raising up church planters in the context of life giving community and helping them understand the nature of their host culture, then we're not going to plant healthy, thriving, strong churches. If our goal is to just fill up a room rather than deploy people into the culture, we can never reach our city. Dude, renovation cannot get big enough to reach our county.
Yep.
The county we're in is 750,000 people. So just 1% of that, I would be required to be a church of 7,500.
Right.
But if I can deploy 1,000 people in 10,000 relationships, then we actually have a chance to change the city and change the world.
Hey, Leon. Personally, I want to thank you for the good work that you're doing for Jesus, and thank you for your commitment to disciple making. Thank you for your commitment to church planning. Thank you for your commitment to multiplication, and also thank you for being a partner at Exponential too. We are grateful. For those who didn't catch it at the top, yeah, Leonce is going to be one of our main stage speakers this March, the first week of March in sunny Orlando, Florida. If you are wanting to go to Exponential, you need to get a ticket now because we'll actually sell out probably in the next week and a half because we're at I think 95% talent they told me this week sell out. So and there you go. There's the lineup. You see Leonce's happy face in there. I'll tell you, we got a terrific lineup too. About half the folks that are speaking are international. Some people that you maybe don't know of that I got the privilege to meet that you're going to be so delighted you got a chance to hear them. So I would encourage you, if you are wanting to go and bring some folks with you, go to exponential.org/2024, exponential.org/2024. Leonce, thanks for joining us. And for all of you, thanks for joining us for this 180 webinar. See you next time.
Hey, thanks for having me, brother.